When his family went on a luxury cruise, they left him to die alone. But what they didn't know, he had 4 days left, and a plan that would change everything. I never expected to return to that house, Victor Harmon's grand, ivy-covered estate nestled in a quiet cul-de-sac where every driveway held a luxury car and every mailbox was polished weekly. My name is Jade Mitchell, and until last month, I was married to Brady Harmon, Victor's son. When Brady left me for a colleague named Hannah and casually offered his father's declining health as an excuse to take space, I didn't argue. I just packed my dignity and left. But when Patricia Ward, Victor's longtime attorney, called and asked me to check in on him just for a few days while the family went on a Mediterranean cruise, something in her voice made me say, yes. Victor hadn't requested his son or his ex-wife. He'd asked for me. I arrived on a gray Wednesday afternoon with a single suitcase and cautious expectations. Victor greeted me from his favorite chair in the sunroom, thinner than I remembered, a soft plaid blanket over his knees and sharp intelligence still gleaming in his eyes. "You came," he said, with the kind of quiet relief that made my chest ache. "You asked," I replied simply. We spent that first evening in tentative conversation. I made us tea. He told me stories, most of them about Martha, his late wife, and very few about his own children. The silence around Brady, Elaine, and even Melissa was telling. His family had become strangers, and yet he remembered that I used honey instead of sugar and preferred chamomile at night. On Thursday, I noticed the heating barely functioned and the fridge held little more than bottled water and some expired yogurt. The so-called care plan Brady claimed to have arranged consisted of a nurse who hadn't visited in 10 days and a printed schedule full of gaps. They said I was too picky, Victor murmured when I gently questioned him. That I complained too much. I called Patricia that night. "You were right," I said. "They've been neglecting him." Her sigh told me she already knew. "He's not asking for sympathy, Jade. He's asking for justice." Friday morning, while Victor napped, I began reviewing his paperwork. It didn't take long to find the trail: unauthorized transfers from Victor's account to Brady's, withdrawal slips with forged initials, and a trail of canceled doctor's appointments over the last 6 months. "They wanted me to just fade away," Victor said quietly when I showed him the records. "But not yet. Not before I tell the truth." That night, we drafted a plan. Patricia would bring in a notary and medical professionals to certify Victor's mental capacity. Everything needed to be ironclad. "They'll contest it," he warned. "They'll claim I was confused. They won't win, I promised." Saturday was calm. We watched old movies. Victor shared memories. I made him soup, helped him bathe, and played his favorite Chopin nocturnes while he drifted in and out of sleep. And in those moments, something changed. In me too. I stopped seeing Victor as Brady's father. I began to see him as a man robbed of dignity by those closest to him, and I felt a fierce, protective fire kindle in my chest. "Why me?" I asked him late that night. He smiled faintly. "Because you're the only one who sees me." By Sunday, everything would begin to unravel. But in that still, aching quiet of Saturday night, it was just us two people discarded by the same man, clinging to each other in the face of silent cruelty. We were no longer waiting for justice. We were building it. Sunday morning arrived with a hushed weight in the air, as if the walls themselves knew what was coming. I brought Victor his usual morning tea, but his hands trembled more than usual. A bluish tint ghosted around his lips. "You don't have to pretend," I said gently, steadying the cup. "You're not well, are you?" He gave a thin but honest smile. "Ironic, isn't it? After all our play acting, the real thing sneaks in." I called Diane, the hospice nurse. She'd been checking in occasionally until Brady and Elaine abruptly canceled her regular visits 2 weeks ago. When I explained Victor's condition, her voice tightened with concern. "I'll come by this afternoon," she promised. "Make him comfortable until then." This wasn't part of the plan, not like this. The strategy, the evidence, the final message. It all suddenly felt less urgent than making sure Victor's last hours had some measure of peace and dignity. "What would you like for breakfast?" I asked, trying to give him something, anything normal. He smiled wistfully. "Peaches. Fresh peaches with cream." Martha made them every Sunday. That request sent me to 3 different stores before I finally found a small display of late-season peaches. I sliced them just as he described, thin crescents with a touch of whipped cream. When he took his first bite, his eyes glistened. "Just like she used to make," he whispered. No one's remembered that in years. The rest of the morning, I did things not for revenge, but for Victor. I read aloud from the big sleep, adjusted his pillows, played Debussy softly in the background. The man I'd once called my father-in-law was no longer family by name, but he had become family in a deeper, unspoken way. That afternoon, Diane arrived. After her exam, she took me aside. "His organs are shutting down," she said gently. "It's happening faster than we thought. Maybe a day, maybe less." I nodded, heart sinking. Should I call the family? She looked back at Victor, who lay peacefully beneath the quilt I'd tucked around him. No, if they wanted to be here, they would have been. Victor had overheard us. He motioned me close. "Don't call them," he said firmly. "But we still have work to do. Call Patricia. It's time." Patricia arrived within the hour, accompanied by a notary named Thomas. Victor, summoning strength he didn't seem to have, sat up with effort as they prepared the documents. His voice was steady, determined. With signatures and video confirmations, he made it official. I was appointed trustee of his estate. Substantial donations would go to elder abuse prevention foundations. His new will explicitly cited Brady's abandonment as the reason for his disinheritance. Then came the letter. "Let's record it," Victor said. What followed wasn't angry or vengeful, it was a calm, heartbreaking truth. He recounted missed holidays, broken promises, quiet neglect. He spoke not to shame them, but to make them see. "The greatest pain," he said, voice trembling with clarity, "is knowing the people you loved saw you as a burden, not a father." Even Thomas, the stoic notary, wiped his eyes. Patricia placed her hand on Victor's gently. "We'll make sure they hear every word," she promised. Before sunset, Victor asked me to retrieve his old video camera. "They'll question my sanity," he said. "So I want them to see me, really see me." He recorded a 20-minute statement, composed and devastating. He recounted the cruel details, Brady's offhand remarks, skipped medications, meals left cold on distant counters. And then he turned to me. "She showed me more dignity in 4 days than my family did for years." That night, he asked for a small glass of port. "There's a bottle behind my economics textbooks," he said. "Martha and I were saving it for our 50th. I found the dusty bottle. We toasted with crystal glasses I'd polished myself. "To justice," he said. "To dignity," I replied. We sat in the twilight, reading Chandler and listening to rain tap against the window panes. He spoke of Martha, of plans that never came to pass. Not once did he mention Brady. At midnight, his breathing changed. There was no dramatic last word, no confession, just a quiet end. His hand growing still in mine as I held it. Diane confirmed his passing at dawn. She seemed moved by the peace on his face. "He looks like he just fell asleep," she said. "He did," I whispered. Reading Raymond Chandler, drinking 50-year-old port. Later that morning, the funeral home came. The man who collected Victor's body recognized him. He was generous, he said, always gave to the fundraisers, never wanted credit. Once they were gone, the house turned silent. But my purpose had only sharpened. Brady and his family would return tomorrow, expecting an old man near death. Instead, they'd find the truth. Monday arrived with a stillness that felt almost ceremonial. I'd spent the early morning preparing every detail of what Victor and I had orchestrated carefully, methodically. This wasn't revenge. Not anymore. It was something purer. Just as at noon, I heard them. Car doors slammed. Laughter rang through the air. Brady's voice, carefree. "Come on, let's get this stuff inside." Through the living room window, I watched them approach, the same people who had left Victor to die while they sipped cocktails on cruise decks. Brady led the way, arms full of duty-free bags. Elaine tottered behind in wedge heels, her skin reddened from too much sun. Melissa and Hannah trailed, still caught in their vacation bubble. The front door opened. "Honey, we're home," Brady called out. Then he saw me. The room fell quiet. Brady's smile faltered. Jade? Elaine blinked. What's with the funeral? Get up? Where's Dad? Victor passed away, I said, my voice calm and clear. Saturday night. The bags fell from Brady's hands. What do you mean? Passed away? Elaine asked, as though the word itself offended her. He died peacefully in his sleep, I said, standing tall. The funeral was yesterday. Many of the neighbors came. It was a beautiful service. Brady's eyes narrowed. You held the funeral without us? I left messages, I replied. You never returned the calls. Melissa looked stricken. I told you that call sounded serious, Brady. He waved her off. This is insane, he muttered. We need to sit down. I agree. I gestured to the living room. A cream-colored envelope sat waiting on the coffee table, leaning against the family photo. Victor, I noticed, had stood slightly apart in that image, smiling faintly while the others beamed for the camera. They hesitated. No one sat in Victor's rocking chair. It felt sacred now. There are things you need to hear, I said, picking up the letter. Elaine crossed her arms. Let me guess. He changed his will, perhaps, I replied evenly. But maybe let him speak first. I opened the letter and began to read. Victor's words poured through me, each line layered with grace and pain. He recounted missed holidays, forgotten birthdays, cancelled appointments, the time they turned down his oxygen to save on utilities, the way they had called him the old man as if he weren't listening. Brady looked away. Elaine's face hardened. Melissa fidgeted. Hannah stared at the carpet. I don't write this from anger, I read aloud, but with clarity. The greatest pain in life isn't death. It's realizing those you love see you as a burden. When I finished, silence hung in the air like thick smoke. Brady finally muttered. He wasn't in his right mind at the end. He didn't know what he was saying. He was perfectly lucid, I said, and he left more than a letter. I picked up the tablet and pressed play. Victor appeared on screen, calm, alert, eyes shining with conviction. They listened. Or at least, they were forced to. He described it all. The neglect, the indifference, specific incidents of cruelty and carelessness. And then, his decision. She's the only one who treated me with dignity, he said, speaking of me. She's the only one who earns what I leave behind. Brady stood abruptly. This is a setup. You manipulated him. The doorbell rang. Perfect timing. I opened the door to find Patricia and Notary Thomas, calm and composed as ever. Am I interrupting? Patricia asked. Not at all, I replied. The family was just learning Victor's final wishes. Patricia stepped inside and opened her briefcase. As executor of Victor Harmon's estate, she began. I am here to deliver the official terms of his will. Brady puffed up, smug again. Fine, let's get this over with. Patricia didn't flinch. The will is straightforward. Victor Harmon has left his entire estate to Jade Mitchell. The rest is to be donated to elder abuse prevention charities. Elaine gasped. That's not legal. We're his family. The will explicitly cites neglect and abandonment as cause for disinheritance. Patricia continued. It was witnessed, notarized, and filed with the court. 2 physicians certified Mr. Harmon's mental competence at the time of signing. Brady's face paled. We'll contest this, Elaine cried. This is fraud. You're welcome to try, Patricia said coolly. But with the evidence we have, witness statements, financial records, video testimony, you'll be wasting money you no longer have access to. What do you mean? Brady asked, his voice cracking. Patricia looked directly at him. The house you occupy belongs to the Harmon Family Trust. That trust is now under Jade's control. The investment accounts you've been accessing have been frozen. Pending investigation. Brady turned to me, stunned. You can't do this, Victor. Already did, I said. I'm just carrying it out. Melissa looked at her father. What about our college fund? Brady couldn't meet her eyes. Patricia answered gently. Victor provided Brady with funds years ago for that purpose. Those accounts were never created. The room exploded. Elaine shouted. Melissa cried. Hannah, wisely, slipped out the door. Without a word, I let them spiral for a few moments. Then I quietly stepped into the hall, retrieved my suitcase, and turned toward the door. Brady followed. Jade, please, he begged. voice cracking. Let's talk. I made a mistake with Hannah, with Dad, everything. I can change. I studied him, finally saw him for what he was: charming, selfish, hollow. I removed my wedding ring and placed it in his palm. You left him to die, I said. Now you get nothing, including me. I handed him the apartment keys and walked to the door. You won't get away with this, he shouted behind me. I'll take you to court. I turned back one last time. You taught me something valuable, Brady. Always keep receipts. And then I walked out into sunlight, into freedom. Across the street, Mrs. Peterson waved gently from her porch. I returned the gesture with a soft smile. I wasn't thinking about revenge, or even victory. I was thinking about second chances, about living well, about Victor. He found peace. Now it was my turn. A week passed. The house was no longer mine to live in, but I returned one last time alone, just after sunrise. The neighborhood was still quiet, early winter frost glinting on the hedges. I stood on the front step with a heavy heart and a small bouquet of white lilies. Inside, everything was just as I had left it. Victor's reading glasses still rested beside his chair. A folded blanket draped over the armrest. The scent of old books and cedar lingered in the air, and for a moment, it felt like he'd simply stepped into the next room. I lit a candle in the fireplace mantel and placed the flowers next to the photo we had used at the service. The photo of him smiling, not posed or distant, but genuinely content. One we'd taken together on his final full day. I wanted that version of him to be remembered. Patricia had wrapped up the estate paperwork with quiet efficiency. The donations had already been transferred, over $2 million spread across 4 elder advocacy organizations, each one receiving Victor's story along with his gift. They called me, most of them. Some cried. One executive told me Victor's story would be shared at their next conference as a real-world example of how neglect often hides in plain sight. He would not be forgotten. Neither would the truth. Brady's threats had fizzled quickly. Their lawyer took one look at the documentation and advised silence. Elaine was seen at the community center a few days later, demanding answers from people who only shook their heads and turned away. Melissa tried to reach out once, an email filled with guilt and half-hearted apologies, but I didn't reply. They didn't deserve closure from me. That morning, I walked through each room of the house one final time. I paused longest in Victor's study, the dustless shelf where his port had been, the journal we had started. Together, letters to Martha, he called it. He only wrote 2 entries before he passed, but they were beautiful. I left it there, for whoever came next. In the driveway, I hesitated before getting in the car. A quiet knock startled me. Mrs. Peterson stood beside the mailbox, wrapped in a thick shawl. You leaving for good now? She asked. I think so. I nodded. Time to start something new. She stepped forward and pressed a small envelope into my hand. From Victor. He gave it to me before, just in case. I opened it in the car. The edges already soft from being handled. It was a note written in Victor's unmistakable handwriting. Dear Jade, if you're reading this, then our time together has ended, at least in the way the world understands time. But know this. In just a few days, you gave an old man peace, laughter, and the strength to say what needed to be said. You reminded me that dignity isn't something we're given. It's something we reclaim. Use what I left you not just to survive, but to build, to create something that honors kindness and truth. You were never part of the plan, but you were the best thing that ever happened to it. With all my thanks. Victoria sat for a long time after reading it, the letter resting in my lap like a blessing. By the end of the month, I'd moved into a small apartment near the coast. I started volunteering at one of the organizations Victor donated to. Eventually, they offered me a job: community outreach and education. At night, I'd write stories about quiet heroes, about found family, about people like Victor. One of them got published. Then another. One evening, while watching the tide roll in, I whispered to the wind, "We did it, Victor." The air felt warm, like a nod from beyond. I wasn't the same woman Brady had abandoned. I wasn't the same woman who first knocked on Victor's door, scared and directionless. I was someone who had faced silence and filled it with truth, and I was finally free. 3 years later, the community center auditorium was full rows of chairs filled with families, caregivers, and advocates. On the projector screen above the podium, a familiar face appeared. Victor.it was a still image from his final video testimony, calm, dignified, composed. I stood at the side of the stage, heart thudding, as the announcer introduced me. Please welcome Jade Mitchell, founder of the Harmon Initiative, a nonprofit dedicated to preventing elder abuse and honoring the voices too often ignored. Applause followed me to the stage. Not polite applause, real, warm, and sustained. I took a deep breath, looked out at the crowd, and smiled. I'm not a lawyer or a doctor, I began. And 3 years ago, I didn't know the first thing about advocacy. I was just a woman helping an old man drink port and read Raymond Chandler. But that man, Victor Harmon, taught me something powerful in his final days, that silence is its own kind of cruelty, and that telling the truth, even when it's too late to fix everything, still matters. I spoke about neglect, not just the obvious kind, but the quiet kind. The kind that comes wrapped in polite smiles and vacation photos. I spoke about the power of documentation, of keeping receipts, of refusing to let cruelty go unanswered. And I spoke about Victor, not just as a victim, but as a man who reclaimed his voice in the last act of his life. When I stepped down, people lined up to shake my hand. A nurse, a granddaughter, a retired social worker. They all had stories. I wish my grandfather had someone like you, one young man said with tears in his eyes. I thought of Victor often. Sometimes I still felt him in small moments, like when I passed a grocery store peach display in November, or when classical music played on the radio. I lived differently now, not lavishly, but meaningfully. I bought a small home near the coast. I adopted an old beagle named Martha. I ran my nonprofit with a small but fierce team. Every dollar Victor had left had been stretched into grants, support services, and legal aid for people with no voice. Victor's name was now etched on plaques, on a community center wall, even on the spine of a published book I wrote. The Last Gift. A true story of dignity, justice, and one final stand. It became a quiet bestseller. A year ago, I was invited to a reading in a bookstore just outside the city. Halfway through the event, I noticed a familiar figure lingering near the shelves, Melissa. She waited until the end, then quietly approached. "Hi," she said, awkward but sincere. "I didn't come for a confrontation. I wanted to say thank you for what you did for Grandpa. I know my mother and Brady were furious about the will. Still are, but they were wrong. I see that now." I studied her face. It had changed. There was humility in it. "I hope you're doing okay," I said simply. "I'm trying to." She nodded. "I work at a hospice now, believe it or not. And I started a scholarship in Grandpa's name. Small one, but it's a start." We didn't hug. We didn't exchange numbers. But as she walked out of the store, I felt something shift, like one more burden had been quietly set down. That evening, I returned home and lit the same candle I had placed beside Victor's photo all those years ago. I poured a small glass of port, set Raymond Chandler beside my chair, and opened the last letter Victor had ever written me, one I'd never read until now. "Jade, if the world ever asks what happened here, don't say revenge. Say redemption. Not just mine, but yours too. We both got written off. We both were told we didn't matter. But together, we told the truth. That's the only kind of story worth telling. Don't just live well. Live wide. Travel. Laugh. Keep fighting when it matters. And when you drink port, never forget justice, like wine, is best served aged and honest. All my gratitude." Victoria smiled, lifted the glass toward the candlelight, and whispered, "To justice and to beginnings."